This plenary is Science to Action, creating a broad-based movement for the protection of future generations. And I know of no better person to address this topic than the amazing Charlotte Brody. We're so pleased to have you with us, Charlotte. Charlotte is the National Director for Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, and she'll be telling you a lot about that program. She's also Vice President of Health Initiatives for the BlueGreen Alliance, and I hope that she'll talk about that as well, two very important national initiatives. So rather than giving the lengthy bio that you have and all the vast wealth of experience, I'd just like to invite and welcome Charlotte Brody to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I'm so honored to be here. I've been here twice before, both for ACAT conferences, and I learned so much from both, and I hope I added to the conversation in a way that made the work going forward a little bit more effective, and that's what I really want to do today. I'm going to talk about this new initiative, Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, but I don't want to talk about it like it's a recruiting poster that in all of the work that people are doing should be set aside, and rather you should all be doing what I'm doing. I think that's completely inappropriate and bad strategy. But we began the conversations, and Janet Mon, who's here, and Elise Miller, who's here, were part of those conversations. We began a set of conversations almost 3 years ago now to really talk about how we've won a lot of change and we've made a lot of difference, but it hasn't mattered enough. We're not winning enough. And what could we do to win more and have more power? This morning when we were talking about how much data in that extraordinary first panel, I thought about raising my hands and saying, you know, it's never about more data, it's always about more power. And when you're up against the coal industry and the oil and gas industry, you're up against the most powerful industries and the military, right? It wouldn't be enough to just do oil and gas and coal and the military. You're up against the most powerful forces in the economy. And honoring the difficulty of that work and honoring how smart and strategic we have to be about overcoming that is really, I think, the heart of the conversation, not not what the cancer data will or will not show us in any given day. So we were trying to have that kind of conversation in the creation of Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. And so we were asking each other, and more people brought into this maybe 50-person conversation, if you were going to press restart or build on the work, all of the good work that's gone on, what would you do? And the answer was, well, we'd build an alliance to reduce exposure to toxic chemicals during the first 1,000 days of development. And that language mattered a lot to us because I will say to you as an old OBGYN nurse, the idea that we think that children come out and we can start with day one after they're born is completely not based on what we understand about prenatal exposures. And that if it was said earlier today, Gudgy Cook is the first person I heard say it, an Akwesasne elder now. Women are the first environment. And if you want to really protect children, you protect women, and not just pregnant women. You protect all women who may become pregnant. And that's really the kind of world that we're trying to build in Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. So when we started talking about, well, where is the science the strongest? Where can we tell the strongest part of the story? The answer that we got from Philippe Grandjean and his colleague Phil Landrigan and others is you would start with the chemicals that are harming babies' brains. And you would tell the story of how, from the moment of conception, these chemicals can start impacting the way we're wired, the way our synapses work, and change the ability of a child to learn and thrive. And we'd also be talking about how prevalent these chemicals are, that it's part of why I think cancer data is so hard to work, is people are being exposed everywhere else. So trying to create some kind of clear arrow-like definition based on data here versus data somewhere else it's difficult, and it shouldn't be necessary. But we have very good data on how prevalent these chemicals are in pregnant women. This is mostly data from the University of California at San Francisco, which just asks all of the women who come to the prenatal clinic if they're willing to share their blood and urine for this study. And we know, as Maureen said so importantly earlier on, we know that these are problems that are affecting so many children in the United States. 1 in 6 children has some kind of developmental disability. And the result of that is that our children don't have the IQs that they could be having. When Vi talked about PCBs and mostly talked about PCBs and cancer, remember this morning? She's right there. And but then at the end, if you remember, she said, and we also have that the school in that community has the lowest, what do we call that? The lowest test scores of the schools in the area. Well, we know that besides being a carcinogen, PCBs are one of the chemicals that are neurotoxic, that are poisonous to the brain and the nervous system, what Philip Grandjean calls brain drain chemicals. And so thinking that we have to think about the damage that these chemicals can do, not just in cancer, but also in the ability of children to learn, is a really important thing to wrap our minds around. And what it means is that kids just aren't as able to learn and make decisions, and the cost of that, we think, is $130 billion in the United States. So again, Maureen talked about this as well. It's just a different way of saying it. The percentage of children with autism has grown dramatically. And this is genes don't change this fast, right? This has to be something that's going on in the environment that is creating this increase. And so we talk in Healthy Babies, Bright Futures about this being a silent epidemic, that the connection between chemicals and chronic diseases, as Ruth talked about this morning, but also intellectual impairment is a problem that we need to address. And so Healthy Babies, Bright Futures is trying to address that. And here are the 3 things that we've come up with, 3 different strategies. One we call Bright Choices, and I'll talk more about this, but this is our ability, this is thinking about maybe you can't change the military easily, or maybe you can't change the oil and chemical companies as easily, but where can we find a pressure point to change markets and change the way things are produced and sold? And the second is Bright Cities. Some of you saw me follow Mayor Berkowitz out this morning. This is our effort to really acknowledge that some of the most progressive things that are going on in the United States are going on in cities, and that they are, like Anchorage versus Alaska, cities are often where there's just a more willingness to experiment, more willingness to really think about social determinants of health, and more willingness to be bold in trying to address those problems. So how can we really develop a program that recognizes that? And then the third is to really think about how we can use the science and turn that into action. And for all of the things we do, we're really trying hard to be science-based and data-driven, and to measure the results, not in how many stories we get in the newspaper, or not how busy we are, but in what have we really done to lower those exposures and give kids a better chance. So a little bit more about Bright Choices. This is a campaign that Pam has been part of, that we're first focused on bringing together a lot of the individual work that individual groups have done and give them the ability to make strategic and funding decisions together to change the way things are. And the focus of this campaign so far has been about flame retardants, and the focus inside of flame retardants, for a large part of it, has been about retailers, because it's a lot easier to go to a retailer and talk to them about moving away from flame retardant chemicals than it is to start with the companies that make flame retardants and have a vested interest in keeping producing what they are producing. And there have been incredible successes. 14 of the 20 top residential furniture retailers, Crate and Barrel, and companies like that, Ashley, have agreed to go flame retardant free, and one more big one is coming along in the next couple of weeks. And so we now know that there's at least $24 billion in the annual retail market that has moved away from flame retardants in residential furniture. It's a big deal. And similarly, the campaign has done a really good job of telling the story about flame retardants in nap mats and cradle mattresses and nursing pillows that just don't need to be there. Whatever, the idea that instead of, that most of us do not smoke cigars or pipes while we're nursing our babies. So the idea that we really need, that the first thing we need is the protection from fire in a pillow we use to hold our baby on is just silly. And then it turns out also that these flame retardants don't actually work to retard flames. But what they do is poison us and our babies. So there's just been a really good job of moving the market away from flame retardants in the products, in the foam products that are used for babies and toddlers. And now we're doing this really neat project in Seattle where all of the nap mats and cots in a daycare center have been switched out for flame retardant free ones. And we are measuring the flame retardants in the children and the teachers before and after that experiment. And we've also, this has been hard fought, but our friends, especially in the state of New York, have been focused on Bye Bye Baby and Babies R Us. And that wasn't easy either, but it's easier to talk to them than it is to talk to the chemical companies that produce flame retardants about changing what they do. And Bye Bye Baby is taking all the flame retardants out of all of their products. And Babies R Us is moving along and is actually now talking to their suppliers about all the chemicals they don't want in the products that they put on the shelves of Babies R Us. And then one of the great things about this that's been so much fun is that the International Association of Firefighters, the Firefighters Union, has been an incredible ally in moving away from flame retardants so that you have these men and women in their fire gear explaining that cancer is now the largest killer of firefighters. Now, this year, more people who were involved in the cleanup and rescue of 9/11 have died from cancer than died the day of 9/11. So what can we do so that we're getting chemicals out of things that might burn? And one of the things we can do is actually to take flame retardants that don't do anything to really stop the fire, but who end up poisoning firefighters and other people who are trying to help. And then also there's been a lot of really good work at the state level, and so there are bans and reporting requirements in many states and even in some counties. So that's Bright Choices, and built on the very good work that has happened on flame retardants. We're gearing up to do similar sorts of work on arsenic and on phthalates, two of the other groups of chemicals that we know harm babies' brains before and after birth. The second thing that I talked about a little already is Bright Cities, where we're just now with Dearborn, Michigan, Minneapolis, Salt Lake, and Seattle figuring out how a city can first assess what their biggest opportunities are to limit brain drain chemicals from getting into their youngest residents, and then taking those actions and measuring the drop in those exposures. So the things that we're talking about are water and air quality and building codes and what cities purchase and childcare regulations, as Ensei was describing, and things like what are we using in parks and playgrounds. You know, if ground up rubber, which I thought was such an advancement over gravel as a cover for a playground. I mean, it seems so smart, and it's recycled and everything. Well, it turns out that the benzene that was put into the rubber comes out of the rubber when you grind it up and let it bake in the heat, right? So you're exposing children to what we know is both causes cancer and also is a brain drain chemical. And then the third thing that we're doing is science into action, which is really both the bedrock and the incubator for all of our programs. And trying to really ask ourselves the question every time we do a piece of work, you know, what are we doing? How do we do this in partnership with other groups? And what's going to make the biggest change? And we're trying to do this both by changing markets, but also helping people make individual decisions. So there's this very cool guide on the Healthy Babies, Bright Futures website that lets you pick, you know, sort of where you are in your life, and then what changes can make the biggest difference. And it turns out hand washing and taking your shoes off outside actually have really good data behind them as lowering levels of exposure. So we both are trying to work at the meta level, but also the simple things someone can do. And let me say to you, as somebody who likes to be really data-driven and loves my husband, I cannot get my husband to take his shoes off outside. So you can have good science and good data, but it's just never quite enough. And we're trying to figure out where the greatest opportunity for change is. So one of the things that we've learned in doing this is that we can't forget about lead. This was something we actually learned before the stories about Flint started coming out. We thought that we would be focused on arsenic and phthalates and flame retardants because lead was sort of fixed. And what we've come to understand is that we did solve much of the lead problem. We got lead out of paint and we got lead out of gasoline. And for more than 90% of American children, that created a dramatic improvement in their ability to learn. So that's good news, right? But we left a lot of kids behind. And they turn out to be the low income and African American kids were the ones we left behind the most. So that we have to go back and the data is very clear that if we don't solve the lead problem, what we do on phthalates, what we do on flame retardants, what we do on other chemicals isn't going to make a difference. So we're doing that. And one of the things that we did right after the stories of Flint started coming out was we launched Healthy Babies, Bright Futures publicly with a pay what you can water test kit, doing this in partnership with Virginia Tech, where Mark Edwards is the hero to the people of Flint who figured out that what they thought they knew, they knew, and what the experts were saying about them not having a lead problem was a lie. And any scientist who helps a community, who uses science to affirm what a community already knows, I think is deserving of hero status. And so that's going on. We'll have a program about that soon. And we're also, a report on what we've learned in that program soon. And we're also doing this very cool project with 10 cities to figure out if citizen scientists can have easier ways of figuring out if there's a lead problem in their home. So instead of having to call somebody in, or instead of using the little kit that actually doesn't tell you what you think it tells you about whether or not you have lead, can we create an app-based kit that a family that's thinking about getting pregnant can use to figure out if there are any lead problems in their home? And we're doing that with 10 communities who are each recruiting 50 families of citizen scientists. And we're also working on an arsenic report that I think will be so important. We've already talked this morning about infant rice cereal being the largest source of arsenic. It turns out, it's not the rice's fault, right? It just turns out that that rice does a better job of sucking any arsenic that's in the soil up and then holding it. And then when we eat the rice, we eat the arsenic as well. And it turns out that this is only true where there's already arsenic in the soil, because arsenic is an old-timey pesticide. So in Louisiana, where they're growing rice, where they used to grow cotton and put arsenic on the cotton, Louisiana rice has a lot of arsenic. California rice doesn't have as much, and neither does Indian rice have as much arsenic. So there's some ways that we can, that label on the package that tells you where the rice comes from turns out to make a difference. It also turns out that using a lot of water to cook your rice makes a big difference, and then you toss out the water. But it's still a huge source of arsenic exposure, and most pediatricians tell young families to start the first solid food. They usually say it should be infant rice cereal, and not oatmeal, not the other grains. And I think and when you ask a pediatrician, why do you do that, they say, and I've actually said this as an old baby nurse, well, it's the easiest to digest. It turns out there's no science behind that. I think that it's actually, it's because it's white. Right, and mushier than oatmeal is. Oatmeal is a little clunky. So part of this is maybe about really encouraging the eating of other grains other than rice. But part of this also is about asking the FDA to do more than was described this morning. Their lower level of arsenic that they're suggesting is based, as you heard this morning, is based on cancer data. Well, we're not talking about cancer. We're talking about chemicals that harm brains, right? Chemicals that eat the nerve endings so that you can't think as well. And if FDA had used neurotoxic chemical data instead of cancer data, they couldn't have come up with the level that they're suggesting is safe. And they're going to just say it's an action level, it's not a safe level, but people hear the government level as the safe level. That's the way we hear it. And we're going to do this great report that I hope will help convince them that they have to do more than what they're suggesting to do now. 11 different partners went out shopping. You went to Carr, is that right? Yes. So in Alaska, ACAT went out and shopped at Carr, and we tested all of these products, and we're doing this report now. We're going to wait till after the election, so there'll be more notification. But then we plan, based on the results, maybe we go to Gerber, maybe we go to WIC, maybe we go to the retailers and ask them to take the rice cereal off the shelves. But the idea is to take what we've learned from the collaborative campaign on flame retardants and apply it to other chemicals. And then finally, we're trying, when we asked ourselves, how could we win more than we have been winning, one of our answers was, we just have to spend more money and time on communications, that we're so under-resourced, and communications often gets cut first. You want to pay everybody at the end of the week, and so the idea of really thinking about using social media at its best and building on what we learn is just, it's hard to spend money on that. And And I will tell you, it's hard for me to spend money on that. I wince every time I look at one of those bills. But it's really important if we want to build more power and make more change. So we're focused on that. One of the things that we did is to really message test the way we talk about chemicals. It turns out that talking about toxic flame retardants makes no sense to almost anybody, and yet I did it again, because we think flame retardants must be a good thing, and we don't explain it the way we should, so that we are continually working, and we'll have a new poll out this month about how to tell our story better, and we share that broadly in the environmental health community. We worked really hard to build a website that doesn't look like any environmental group's website, and is easier for families to approach and use in new and more effective ways. We're really working Twitter feeds and Facebook and all of these things that I barely know how to talk about. And we're also doing a lot of work. These are, two of these are stories that we actually did in partnership with Project Tender, where we are just putting more resources into people who know how to approach the national media and social media and make them pay attention. And finally, we're partnering with the big coalitions that have been doing lead work for 50 years on doing a summit to end lead poisoning in the next 5 years. And really doing this to demonstrate the political will to actually end this problem and to make sure that we're not replacing this problem with some other chemical problem. So our vision is that in 10 years, we will be able to measurably show how millions of children have lower levels of these chemicals, and that they have the developmental and intellectual ability to prosper and participate. Thank you.